All right, so we're going to talk about scripting, opens, bumpers, and endings. So we've kind of already touched in the art of interviewing on these things, but now we're going to go in a little bit more in depth just to kind of get a better understanding of what you should be doing. So scripting, podcast, there's normally it's a process. There's a couple of things. So pre-production, this is where you're gonna kind of plan out. This is kind of where you're building your podcast. So what's your podcast title? What's the description? There's some things in here you absolutely do not need to worry about. This cover artwork, really, it's for a school project. If you want to, go for it. More power to you. I do not expect it. The show type, the format. So like, how is it? It's going to be an interview. So we already know that. The show length, we already know the length of what's expected for both of these projects. So the production, it's the recording of the interviews, finding appropriate sounds. If you want to add in any kind of sound effects, it's not required to have sound effects. If you would like to, you're more than welcome, but it is not required. And then post-production, this is going to involve mixing it, the editing, transitions, music, intros, show endings, publication, all that stuff. So we know we're going to be publishing this to Podbean. I've also given you lots of places where you can edit this week. And it also depends on what kind of computer you have. If you have a Mac, you've got access to GarageBand. You can do all of your recording and editing in GarageBand as well. So you're planning your show. What's the best thing you can do? Listen to other podcasts. There's lots of free podcasts out there that will kind of help you just kind of get an idea. Honestly, one thing I do, I listen to podcasts kind of in between my day. So if I'm working on something that doesn't require, complete attention, I will listen to a podcast. So honestly, it's if I'm cleaning, if I'm cooking, if I am driving, I'll pop in, I'll listen to a podcast. And that's kind of a great place to kind of get your ideas going of what podcasts should be like. So there's a lot of elements, but again, I am not expecting every single one of these elements. What type of music are used? I don't expect you to have music. It also kind of goes into, you can't use any copyrighted music in your podcast. So you've got to make sure if you're going to add in music, you're going to use some of those free items that you can find like on GarageBand or if you're using Audacity for this, things like that. So how does the podcast open? Are you going to have music when you open? Again, must be something that is not copyright music. Really, really, really important. How are you going to handle your openings? Introductions of guests. How are you going to introduce really, this is all going to be part of your opening, this introduction of your guest and your topics. The biggest thing is when you're introducing, you want to make sure you're pulling your audience in. You don't want to just like, well, we're going to talk about Carolina football and this is my guest, Joe Bob. Like you've got to make us want to listen in that introduction. So transition, how do you go from your intro into your topic and then from topic to topic? All right, that's really great. Now let's talk about, whatever. You got to make sure you're kind of smoothly transition. You don't want to just make it very abrupt. How are you going to end the show? How are you going to make people want to come back for another listen? So that's going to be your conclusion at the very end. So typically podcasts are edited programs. Obviously, this is a school project. I'm going to stress that. It's a school project. So if you want to do your whole thing in one shot, you are more than welcome to do that. Now, if you were going to go on to do podcasting, I have students that have taken this course and they've actually started podcasting for organizations they work with. So in those situations, they've had to put a little bit more into it, a lot more editing. But for the purpose of the class, if you want to do this in one shot, you're welcome to do that. So interviews sound live because they're live on tape. It's live when you are doing it, and then you're going to edit for time and for clarity. So that's just something to keep in mind. Honestly, a really easy place to record. You can record in Audacity. I know I've provided you with lots of stuff on how to do it through there, lots of videos and information. But You could record through Zoom, turn the cameras off. It's not going to matter. When you close out a Zoom session, it gives you a breakdown with just the audio or the video. So you could use Zoom to record and do it all in one, especially if whoever you're interviewing is long distance. It's always an option. So scripting, we've kind of talked about this before in the art of interviewing, having some type of a script. And this script could simply just be what your questions are. And as I suggested in the last lecture, you're going to want to have several questions. And then I would go through and highlight, these are the most important ones that I definitely want to make sure I ask. And then just have extras just in case you're not getting as much from that interview as you thought you were going to get. That way you have backup questions. So you're not like, oh, wow, I'm only at 7 minutes. I'm definitely not going to make my time. So you having those, it's really going to help. You have a script anytime you do a speech, news, television, when you're doing a broadcaster, there's a prompt. They always have some kind of script going for them. But again, you want to be careful to not sound too much like a robot. So creative show openers, there's so many things. I've heard so many things. I've heard people that did sports podcasts, and they'll have the sounds of the audience going wild in the background, and they kind of build this story to pull you in. But remember, your opening is 1 minute. It needs to be at least 1 minute. So you don't want to do anything too crazy that it goes way over that minute. And then you're kind of taking away from the podcast. Writing tips. Honestly, so your book's going to give you tons of information. My biggest thing is just when you're writing it, you're probably going to want to write it like you would talk, because this is conversational. So you're going to be, normally when we talk, especially when we're talking to other people, we kind of go into this storytelling mode. So if you're writing out these things, I would just keep that in mind. Writing short sentences. We don't talk in these big, huge, long sentences. So it's just kind of something to consider. Using audio clips to illustrate your points. You can work in audio clips, but honestly, for this podcast, since it's so short and it's for the course, you're probably not going to want to add in audio clips of things going on. But if you're continuing to do podcasts later on, you start working for an organization, it may require bringing in these sound clips. So that's why we kind of talk about it. All right. So bumpers and closings, writing bumpers. They're quick 10 to 15 second transitions. So when you're moving from topic to topic, so you're moving from your opening into your interview, it's only going to be like 10 to 15 seconds. You don't need to do this big, huge, intense situation. Same thing with moving from the interview into your closing. Hey, I'm so glad you're able to come. Thanks so much. I really, really enjoyed your time on the show. And then you would go into your closing. So really nothing too crazy, 10 to 15 seconds. So that could be your call to action endings, just saying a quick goodbye. Really appreciate you coming. Something like you're thanking your guest, thanking the audience for tuning in. And then you would lead into your closing, and the closing where you're really just kind of wrapping up. What was the most important things? Again, your closing should be at least 1 minute. So what was the most important thing that you learned, that you talked about in this interview? If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to reach out. Looking forward to hearing your podcast in the next 2 weeks. You guys have a great day.